Hello, everyone. Greetings. This is Volts for December 3rd, 2025. How Illinois passed its third big clean energy bill in a decade. I'm your host, David Roberts. Toward the end of 2016, Illinois' Democratic legislature passed and its Republican governor signed a sweeping comprehensive energy bill called the Future Energy Jobs Act, or FEJA. It repaired the state's renewable energy program and kept some old nuclear plants open. I wrote a big piece about it for Vox. In 2018, Illinois achieved a Democratic trifecta with the election of Governor J.B. Pritzker. And then in 2021 came another, even more sweeping, comprehensive energy bill called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA. It committed the state to net zero emissions and scheduled the retirement of several fossil fuel plants, among many other things. I wrote a long piece about it here at Volts. And now, here they go again. Just last month, Illinois Democrats, who now boast a legislative supermajority, passed another sweeping comprehensive energy bill called the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act, or KERGA. We got to talk about that later. It is many, many things. It clocks in at over 1,000 pages, but for the most part, it is focused on the electricity system, the grid. I love talking about the grid. So I am super excited to have with me today the two people who, outside of the Illinois legislature itself, arguably had the biggest role in getting this bill conceived, written, pushed for, and passed. Kady McFadden is a longtime organizer, advocate, strategist, and lobbyist in the state. She was a force behind CEJA as well, who now runs her own shop, McFadden Strategies. John Delurey runs legislative and regulatory work for the advocacy group Vote Solar and is a certified Chicago guy, so he has taken a special interest in Illinois legislation. We are going to talk all about it. With no further ado, Kady McFadden, John Delurey, welcome to Volts. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
John, last time I saw you was about a year ago in Chicago, and you were in it. You were head down in the thick of things. What a difference a year makes. Maybe I'll just start with you for a little history. Let's start maybe back when CEJA passed. That was 2021. How have things developed since CEJA, and what was the origin of this bill? This bill is now being framed as a response to Trump, nuking federal policy, and as a response to the spike in electricity bills, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I'm wondering, was it a seed in your head before that? So just run us the post-CEJA kind of energy world in Illinois.
Yeah, thanks again, David. Thanks for having us. So CEJA was just shy of 1,000 pages. You mentioned in the intro that we finally broke that 1,000-page threshold.
Yeah, good. Congrats, guys. Way to go.
Thank you. That's the most important metric of all. But CEJA was transformational. It set the groundwork for all things utility accountability, for drastically improving and fine-tuning our renewable portfolio standard, unleashed a bunch of new money to deploy renewables, and also sort of put a foot in the door for energy storage, especially for small-scale energy storage. And ultimately, that led to pretty tremendous success. So I think when you combine FEJA and CEJA, we've had about 8.6 gigawatts of utility-scale wind and solar, and then 3.3 gigawatts of just local solar. So think community solar, rooftop solar, procured just in the last 8 years or so.
And there's clearly been, I don't know what the polling is or anything, but at the very least, there's obviously been no big voter backlash. I mean,
no.
Voters seem to like it. They keep re-electing the same people.
That was part of the secret sauce of CEJA, is that we built into every page of that bill programs that made sure that these benefits felt local. So community solar was heavily incentivized, but as was the Illinois Solar for All program to ensure that income qualified customers also had access. We broke out new sub-programs on community-driven community solar. And these were all added complications in the moment and not without their own controversy, but it did build social license. It helped us invest in that political future to ensure that we could keep this conversation going. And so a lot of that success is now turned into a pretty robust fleet. We've got 1.1 gigs of distributed generation already energized in Illinois, but it wasn't necessarily deployed to its full effect. And so once we started to see the affordability crisis, not just looming on the horizon, but very real and very present, especially, at least initially, in downstate Illinois, I think we'll talk, a lot about affordability over the course of our time together.
We'll get to it.
But there was this real inflection point where downstate Illinois families were paying $52 more per month because of capacity prices, just capacity. This was just from MISO sort of spiking back in 2022. And so that was the impetus that it was time to go back to the drawing board. And, CEJA set a tremendous foundation, but we had to start fine-tuning a few things.
So the goal then was boosting distributed energy and addressing affordability, which are, as we here know, often the same thing. Those are sort of the twin impetuses?
Impeti?
Impeti? I don't know. I'll have to Google that later. So prices are spiking in Illinois. A little background, there's two big utilities, big investor-owned utilities in Illinois. It's ComEd and Ameren. I think bills are going up on both ends, especially ComEd bills. This is an interesting... So, Kady, I've been reading around about bills rising in Illinois and who people blame, and it's pretty amusing. Just to go briefly down a list. So the Republicans blame CEJA, naturally. They're blaming all the new renewable energy and particularly, and we'll return to this later, they're blaming the retirement of those fossil fuel plants that CEJA created. Then there's some people who blame the grid operators, PJM and MISO. So Illinois is sort of like half in one and half in the other. So it's partially under PJM and MISO, the big market areas, trading areas. Some people blame mismanagement at the grid at that level. Then there's consumer groups, I think, are blaming data centers. There's a lot of data centers coming on in Illinois. It's a big issue there, big manufacturing, and procedural issues in the way of renewables. Basically, it looks like which explanation you want for rising prices. You could just shop around for the one you want. So I guess my first question to you is in your mind, substantively, why are electricity prices rising?
Well, there's plenty of places to place blame. And in crafting state legislation, we really wanted to keep in mind what levers do state policymakers have control over? Of the numerous, we can talk about PJM and MISO, we can talk about data centers, a lot of truth is in a number of these factors. But at the end of the day, what we were solving for is bills are going up. This is the most salient political issue right now. We were hearing from legislators knocking on doors, collecting petition signatures saying, everybody's talking to me about their electricity bills going up. And, what menu could we give them? What suite of policies could we put together for legislators to be able to be the hero in this situation, knowing that state policymakers can only do so much with the numerous factors that you named? And maybe it could be a good time for just a little, you said a few of these things, but Illinois 101, right? We've been a restructured energy market since 1997.
That's going to come up later too.
Okay, great. So we're split between PJM and MISO. So we have to, take both of those into effect when crafting state laws. And one other thing, as the lobbyist here, that I have to name is, I could imagine your listeners could listen and say, oh, big whoop, blue state passes another climate law with a climate governor and super majorities in the House and Senate. But Illinois is a major polluter, right? I mean, we're the 7th largest polluter in the country. We mine coal. We have cities like Coal City and Carbondale in this state. Prairie State Energy Campus, when it was built, was the largest CO2 emitter in the country that had been built in 25 years. So, yet our politics do mirror the country, right? So we have downstate Democrats, we have suburbans, Democrats, we have a lot of city folks, we have our legislature, because, we do have supermajority of Democrats, are broken into so many caucuses: Black caucus, Latino caucus, moderate caucus. I could go on. And so our policies, that we're crafting also have a pretty high bar that they have to meet, because they have to work for all those caucuses.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're making a really good point, which is good background, which is actually, not to blow smoke up your respective butts, but like one of the things that impressed me about the 2 previous Illinois bills is that while it's true that the Republican Party didn't play a very big role in either of them, it is nonetheless impressive as a small d Democratic feat, both of them, in that you are wrangling lots of very distinct caucuses and interest groups. Like, it's a very diverse and fractured environment, even though it is sort of majority Democratic and in the sort of old, just simple polarization way, it's blue. There's still lots of different interest groups within the blue. So this is not easy. There's still a lot of cat herding.
Big time. Well, my point in saying we're the, 7th largest polluter is, the fossil fuel industry is alive and well in the state, and therefore in the state capital. And this bill, Surja is what we like to call it, by the way.
Oh, Surja, not Kurga? Yeah,
Did
that's
you see
probably
what
better.
we did there?
Surja,
Okay.
yeah, better, much better.
But this, Surja, it overhauls how we do energy policy in the state. And I know we're going to get into the details here, but, sure, we're a blue state. Plenty of blue states are running away from climate policy right now.
Yes.
But also, if you're one of those fossil fuel operators in the state, you might not like a lot of the pieces of this. And as a lobbyist, I could tell you like 6 different ways they could try to throw, sands in the gear here. And they did, right? And we were able to overcome all of that.
I guess the reason I asked about electricity rates in the first place is part of what's going to inform policy is what is actually causing prices to go up. But also part of what informs the politics is just why do people think prices are going up? And you both know, this is a national issue this year, next year, and all these elections. So the elections that just took place, the elections that are coming up in 2026, energy affordability is it looms, and you guys are in touch with Democratic circles. All the Democrats are exercised about this. All the Democratic consultants are worked up about this. So part of, to me, sort of the background mystery is just like, what does the public think about this? So do you have any sense, is there any polling or survey data, or do we know anything about why the public thinks this is happening? Because they could, like, when I think about it, trying to think about it from kind of a normie point of view, like, there are utilities, there are data centers, there are legislators, you know what I mean? There are meddlesome green groups. Like, you could pick your enemy out of a wide array. I'm just wondering, do we know what the public thinks about why this is happening?
I saw some polling from Potential Energy just maybe last week that showed 75% of Americans believe we're in a cost of living crisis right now. And what blew me away, even as, having just been fresh off lobbying on this exact issue, but does actually square with, what legislators were saying. However, they're, I would say, more informed on energy policy these days because this was in the limelight. At least I can speak for Illinois. The polling showed 53% believed that clean energy was the same or cheaper than fossil fuels. And more than half believed that the cheaper option to our energy problem is more solar rather than fossils. And I'm actually surprised how much we had to make this case to legislators when we were lobbying on this bill, but they got it once we started explaining what was happening.
I'm a little surprised too, because honestly, like, you pass 2 big energy bills and then prices go up, it's a real easy story for your opponents to tell, right? Like, it's very easy to ride in here and just say, look, they did all this clean energy stuff and then prices went up. That's why.
But the problem this summer was so clearly from the capacity market, right? So then our problem was explaining how the heck a capacity market auction works to, over 100 legislators, which we did. But, the fact that so much of that was beyond our control, but yet we could get creative with policy levers in the state was kind of the pitch.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a little context. So let's jump into the bill. It is a lot. There is a lot to it. So I'm going to try to kind of pick out. We might have to sort of shift into speed round mode toward the end of here, but I've at least picked out a few big things to start with. So, John, I want to start with you about this, what I see as one of the most interesting, intellectually and politically interesting things underneath all this, which is this whole idea of integrated resource planning. So, Volt's listeners know that the country is split up into old school, vertically integrated monopoly utilities who run everything, plan everything, et cetera. Your Southern Power, your Alabama Power, et cetera. And what are called deregulated or restructured markets where retail and wholesale are split up. And Illinois is restructured, which means you're part of two separate markets, PJM and MISO. So you're sort of part of PJM planning and sort of part of MISO planning, but each of the individual utilities, generation utilities and distribution utilities in the state are just planning for their own little thing, which is just a long-winded way of saying that in a restructured state, there is no longer any central planner. There's no planning anymore. And that was originally kind of, I think, was part of the pitch, I think, of deregulation, is just that, like, unleash market forces and good things will happen and nobody needs to plan it centrally. So what it seems to me has happened here is a classic restructured state is saying explicitly that didn't work. That's not, like, deregulation did not work. We need central planning. And so this bill sets up a process whereby Illinois can plan itself. So I'm just curious, just on a sort of almost background intellectual level, do you think this is a sign that the tides are turning against deregulation and restructuring? Or do you see this as like fine-tuning restructuring? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're aiming for the best of both worlds. I think that legislators, after a lot of conversations that Kady had down in the Capitol, came to realize that the only way out is through, that we weren't going to backtrack to gas and coal, that wasn't the solution. And so what was coming next? We had to start getting a better grasp of what was on the horizon. And the policy of, close your eyes and hope the market provides worked, right? We had really affordable, reliable energy in Illinois for a long time after we restructured. It is getting a little bit turbulent. A lot of that is load growth and data centers starting to pop up. Some of that is older plants in the thermal fleet starting to retire. And I will flag there that CEJA did have some decarbonization goals that were meant to start to phase out the fossil and thermal fleet, but none of those have kicked in yet. They don't start until 2030. And so, we are starting to see that energy transition require greater granularity than our current system allows. And so what we have in Illinois, because we're not vertically integrated, because we don't have utilities that can just get permission to build something over there where it's perhaps most suited to load growth, we have to build out a more sophisticated set of carrots. That's what CEJA is, right? FEJA and CEJA, our whole RPS, our portfolio is meant to be carrots to entice the right type of development to the state.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do through this new integrated resource plan policy is fine-tune those carrots. Does spending money now on boosting energy storage create the least cost portfolio in 2030 or 2035? We don't get to decide what gets built when and where, but we do get to start incentivizing the right behaviors out of the merchant fleet and out of developers that are thinking about Illinois. And that's what it's meant to do. So with any luck, we will maintain some of the affordability that likely came from allowing the market to do what it does best, while also starting to fine tune the next steps of the energy transition. And I'm glad you asked about the IRP. The souvenir that I took home from the home stretch of lobbying for this bill was a flyer that the sponsor passed me. And it's no attribution, but it's got a big red flag. And you almost think that it should have a hammer and sickle on it. And it just says, oppose the integrated resource plan.
Central planning. That's a bugaboo on that side going way back.
I just never thought that IRPs were going to be sexy enough to deserve their own Oppo flyer.
You know that communism is looking for any way to get in the door, John. And if it has
exactly
to be utility planning, that's it. So what we have now then, as far as I know, is a first in the nation, which is a restructured state that is nonetheless doing some central planning and sort of, bolstering the results of the restructuring in the name of long-term security. So a little bit of both. I wonder, is that a way station on the way to somewhere else? Or do you think that's kind of like where you think other states are going to end up somewhere similar, other restructured states? I'm just so curious about how the restructuring debate ends up kind of unfolding throughout all this.
Yeah, and I think this brings me to one of the main points that I'm excited about. We're here, David, to give you hope. That's my main goal by the end of this chat.
That's what my whole pod is for, just to keep my spirits up.
Some of that hope, I believe, can come in the form that we're experimenting here in Illinois.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of states that I used to look to for climate leadership are starting to shy away. I look at California and some of their actions over the last couple of years. I look at Massachusetts, my home state,
yes,
who right now is starting to consider some really bad ideas.
Pennsylvania backing out of Reggie as we speak. A lot of blue states are hedging or backing off.
And so we're trying to build out this roadmap of what a better forward-thinking alternative looks like. And we'll see how this shakes out. We've got a great commission here in Illinois. They'll be doing some planning. They're going to start to build out some of those tools.
Who's doing this? So there's going to be a state version of what utilities call an integrated resource plan, an IRP. There's going to be a state version of it. Who's doing that? Who builds it?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this IRP compared to some of the IRPs that we wade into in other vertically integrated states, is that it's a neutral party at the helm, right? It's not the utility who owns all the modeling software and pulls it together.
And has certain incentives, you might say.
Absolutely. And so this is going to be run by the state. It's a collaborative effort. It's primarily the Illinois Commerce Commission and the Illinois Power Agency collaborating to figure out what that energy roadmap looks like. And they'll have weigh-in from other agencies as well. But that's the main thrust of the modeling, and that will apply primarily to Ameren and ComEd. I'll also flag another, hopefully not soon to be forgotten element of the bill, is that we're having municipal utilities and rural electric cooperatives starting to do this type of advanced planning as well.
I saw that just last night. That's down in there too. So the non-investor-owned utilities in the state, the munis and the co-ops, are also having to do planning now, basically in a formal way that they didn't have to do before.
And they cover over 1 million customers. This is not a small slice of Illinois, but they have never really thought too far ahead. And I think case in point there is that big energy plant that Kady already mentioned, the Prairie State Energy Campus, probably would not have been built if they had been doing this type of long-term energy resource planning at the time. So we're hoping to help them think through those next few steps.
I sort of wonder, though, when you go to a utility and said, if you had done this smarter planning, you wouldn't have spent all this money on big new infrastructure. And it seems like that's kind of what they want to do. So maybe they don't want to. Maybe there's a reason they're not planning, but we'll see. I won't dwell on the utilities. The next big thing, which I find super fascinating in this, and I'd love to hear from you, Kady, about how you explained this to legislators and persuaded them to do it. So, Volts listeners know every state has a commission, the job of which is to oversee public utilities. Public Utility Commission, called different things in different states. In Illinois, it's called the Illinois Commerce Commission, ICC. So the bill gives the ICC a couple of new powers, which I have separate questions about, so I'll deal with this one first. First, it gives them the power to, as an outgrowth of this planning they're going to be doing, the ability to procure and build renewable energy and to raise rates to pay for it. So, as far as I know, no other public utility commission in the country has the power not just to advise or oversee utilities, but to take action and get energy built directly. It seems a little bit like this is taking a little bit of power from utilities and taking a little bit of power from legislature and sticking it in a new place where it has not conventionally been. So I'm just curious, Kady, like what did legislators make of that idea?
So there were two hurdles, right, to passing this bill. So before we even got into lobbying rank and file lawmakers, we were working with a legislative working group. And that working group was a number of Senate legislators, a number of House legislators, the governor's office, a couple agencies. And so step one was we had to convince those people that this was the right idea, right? When we dreamed this idea up a couple years ago, I remember vividly, we recognized that doing a giant 1,000-page energy bill every 3 to 4 years was maybe good for my business, but not actually the best way to make energy policy for the state of Illinois. And what we needed was the centralized planning. The way I described it was we have a lot of goals, but no one's flying the plane.
Yeah, that gets back to the planning thing.
Precisely. And so step one was that legislative working group. And I have to just give a huge shout out to the lawmakers that put in so many hours really trying to, their job was to call balls and strikes. What goes in the 1,000 pages and what stays out and how does it look? And these folks really dove in, doing their homework. Our approach as the advocates was to be like the teacher's pets. So like to show up and sit in front of the class and have done our homework and have prepped them and given them all the background documents before the meeting, be really clear in our presentation during the meeting, answer questions, deal with stakeholder concerns, in and out of the meeting so that we could really make the case for this. And I think it did take, I would say, about a year of really socializing this concept for it to get traction. And you're exactly right. It could be perceived in both a negative and a positive way of taking power away from the legislature. Do legislators want to vote on rate increases every 3 to 4 years?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe it actually would be better for the ICC, which is their main job and reason for existing is to protect ratepayers. So what's a better place for deciding, if the justification is there for, a more affordable energy future, with a short-term rate increase, et cetera. So I think that was really the pitch that we made both to the working group, including to the governor's office, that this was kind of a structural thing we needed to consider. And I'm going to be honest, David, I was nervous until the final hour before the vote that this was going to get pulled out. Like I was just convinced.
Well, they put in a caveat, right? They added the legislature can come in and veto one of these rate increases if it wants to. It seems like a little bit like a steam valve.
We did agree to a compromise. Yes, and which I think can make some political sense. And again, if we're going to have to engage in that process and show our work. And we have skin in the game here too, right?
Mm-hmm.
We put this forward with the belief that this is not going to mean rolling back of our decarbonization targets. And what it's going to mean is accelerating the clean energy economy. But there is a chance that is not what the numbers show in the future and whatever. So like I said, we're willing to take that chance. We're willing to bet on ourselves and bet on clean energy.
You are also giving a little power away to the Illinois
right.
Commerce.
It's not baking in that it has to go our way.
Yeah, right. So, but just to be clear here, if the ICC does the analysis, decides that not enough renewables are being built in the state to meet the state's targets, just to be clear, it can, on its own, commission new wind and solar projects?
Yeah, I'll let John dig a little bit deeper, but remember that, how we've structured the RPS, the exact percentage of utility scale wind versus, community solar, et cetera, we'd have to pass laws to change the breakdown of wind versus solar, for instance, in the state. And instead, why don't we just give those dials to the ICC to make those adjustments based on seeing the facts in front of them for the next 3 years at that moment in time?
And on the tools that the ICC will use to then react to what the study shows, There's two tools. The first is that flexibility we've already been talking about, and that's just allowing them to procure what's needed when and where to be responsive to that IRP modeling, which is designed to create that roadmap to the least cost resilient energy future. And so they can now toggle resource commitments. They can shift the renewable portfolio standard in order to increase energy commitments through that RPS, potentially increase storage commitments. So essentially, if the model says we need more storage by 2030 or 2035, they don't have to go to Springfield and pass another bill. They can just start procuring more storage in order to save ratepayers money. But the second tool is that and this is a little more ambiguous in the bill text, but they can start procuring power purchase agreements themselves on behalf of ratepayers. The Illinois Commerce Commission and the Illinois Power Agency is able to start looking at how do we procure renewables and other clean energy resources in such a way that we get the benefits of the energy and the capacity and the environmental attribution. So a slight shift from our traditional RPS that was only procuring those environmental attributes and using that as an incentive to bring development to the state. This would be setting up the state to be more of a full service PPA off-taker, similar to other major energy buyers. And so we hope that this will start to bring even more development to the state, but it also helps to spread the benefits of that development across all ratepayers, rather than those full-service PPAs exclusively going to large corporate off-takers. We now have the state weighing in that market in hopes of bringing rates down for everybody.
So the RPS is in law, but basically the ICC can now change that law on the fly based on the results of its study and analysis, more or less.
They're now commissioned, like we have given them the captain's chair to plot the course to that least cost, resource adequate future. And just like CEJA did, just like FEJA did, our goal in the state of Illinois is still to pursue that in as clean a way as possible.
Sure.
We still have our climate commitments. We still have our timeline of decarbonization, but this does allow a little bit more wiggle room to experts and on that neutral platform where everybody can engage. We know the polluters are also going to be diving into this resource planning process, and there's going to be all sorts of fun regulatory waters that emerge from this for us to have that conversation out in the open. So it is, like Kady said, putting all the cards on the table.
Yeah, you can imagine a lot of different ways that this could cause fights.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of, I mean, almost no matter what the ICC does under this power, somebody's going to hate it. I mean, I guess that's probably one of the objections if you're an Illinois lawmaker is if the ICC makes these decisions, what is the accountability mechanism? What if the public doesn't like them? What if the legislature doesn't like them?
Ultimately, the commission in Illinois, just like the commission in every other state, is a creature of statute.
Right.
It was built out of the legislature. It could be destroyed by the legislature. It could be amended by the legislature. And so they always have that ability to change what they don't like about the Illinois Commerce Commission. There's always that type of check and balance.
Right.
And then, of course, these are political appointees in Illinois. And so the governors...
That's a good note, since we're all talking about PUC commissioners a lot these days. These are all appointed, not elected, appointed by Pritzker. So...
Right.
And confirmed by the Senate.
Oh, right.
So there are baked in layers of accountability here, as well as that lever that Kady mentioned, where the legislature wanted one more tool that they could use at a moment's notice in case they got a little nervous with baby's first steps.
And like I said before, I mean, I did not have one lawmaker beg me to vote on rate increases every 3 to 4 years. So there's that too.
Yeah, well, I guess if you're telling lawmakers, like, we can take responsibility for rate increases off your shoulders and put them on somebody else's shoulders, you are going to get some traction for that. Sort of, I guess, the flip side of the ICC's new powers here is that among the things it could do based on its planning, should it decide that it's necessary, is delay these planned fossil fuel power plant closures. This gets to kind of a central political fight, it seems to me, happening in the state right now. It's just about these closures. Republicans are blaming the closures for the price increases, which, as John notes, is temporarily impossible since the plants have not actually closed yet and cannot backward in time affect us. But at the same time, closing a power plant during a time when everyone's panicking that you don't have enough power on the grid is a dicey thing. And now you've given the ICC power over whether that actually happens or not. So I'm just wondering, like, Kady, do you think these fossil fuel closures are going to go forward on schedule? Lots of people, lots of conventional wisdom seems to indicate otherwise.
This is where it gets back to we have things to lose here too, but we bet on ourselves that we believe that what this is going to mean is, the outgrowth of more clean energy and not the rolling back of the decarbonization targets. Like, I don't think that's how this is going to end. But I'll also say the main selling point of the IRP, and this relates, was that, imagine lobbying on this bill a couple weeks ago, right? Legislators are hearing constantly, week after week, about rising electricity bills from their constituents. And we're here like scrambling. Again, we had written the bill years ago, so we weren't actually scrambling. We had been working on it for a while, but it felt like scrambling for a solution. The whole idea of the IRP is, let's proactively plan so we're not in this situation in the future. Let's make sure that we're not waiting till after people are paying, ComEd energy prices spiked 50%. We don't need to wait until that happens to pass policy and make adjustments in our energy policy. In fact, we should be doing it proactively. And so that was the big selling point, is people are hurting right now. And we don't need to wait until we get in this situation to be adjusting our policies.
And the capacity markets are inherently reactive and punitive, right? And that the people who are feeling the punishment are the ratepayers. It is designed to shock the market into incentivizing new entry.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole thing, cost of new entry. And that's what we're starting to see, at least in PJM and MISO, is things going from $5 a megawatt day to $600. And that isn't sustainable, but it also isn't that effective in luring in new entrants, because things take so long. Like a gas plant that was responding to a 2024 capacity price spike would not really emerge to help that auction until well after 2031, 2032. And so there is a moment of reflection where, the fleet that exists will need to figure out what to do. And that was baked into CEJA too. That's not new for SERJA. This idea that, if resource adequacy starts to become a real question, and if it's all hands on deck, the state had always had that authority, but we've now fine-tuned that authority to allow them to throw other ideas at the wall, rather than it just being this binary decision of, gas plants or no. Now it's gas plants or VPPs or bulk storage or increasing time of use rates. Like they have every tool in their disposal.
The critique has gone, if you just have a pure energy market like Texas, the only way to incent new entry is to spike electricity prices, right? And so lots of people complain about the Texas market, that like that mechanism for incenting new generation is not very effective, it's disruptive, it hurts ratepayers, et cetera. So then the whole addition of the capacity market is precisely supposed to solve that problem. You're supposed to get sort of longer term, steadier signals from the capacity market, so you don't get stuck in a position where your energy prices have to spike. And now what you're telling me is that things are moving so fast now, and these people that want to come on the grid are such big draws now, such big loads now. Things are moving so fast that even the capacity market now can't do this in advance either. Basically, neither the energy only market nor the energy plus capacity market is moving fast enough, and thus you have to have planning, which I just find fascinating given the evolution of electricity markets over the last several decades. It is hilarious that we have sort of run full circle back to planning. So those are, I think, a couple of the really big, interesting things. One is this central planning thing that's happening. Two is the Illinois Commerce Commission, basically the Public Utility Commission, now having some, effective power to not just oversee, but to affect the state's energy balance and energy prices as part of this planning. So then let's go through a couple of other things in the bill. There's much, much, much more. There's a bunch of new clean energy funding, but it looks like it's sort of like all comes in bits and pieces from other previous programs. There's not like a major new thing. There's a bunch of new money in here for clean energy, basically. Is there more to say than that?
No, I think it's reflective of the consensus that we managed to reach that renewables are, lo and behold, the cheapest and fastest to market. And so there was comfort in starting to redirect some existing pots of money towards increasing our renewables procurements. And the Illinois Power Agency, the state agency, suggests that this could lead to about 6 additional gigawatts of wind and 4.8 gigawatts of solar by 2035.
Nice. And you also, I noted, tweaked your siting laws, especially for wind and solar. So just, for everybody's out there saying that permitting reform, you have to open the door to everything. I mean, you don't have to. If you have Democratic majorities, you can just open the door to wind and solar. So this is something I was in CEJA too, is basically, I think, reducing the locals' ability to fight off wind and solar siting, basically. Quickly, let's talk about storage. There's several things in here for storage. There's procurements. There's a procurement plan. There's a storage for all plan modeled on the solar for all plan to get storage into low-income hands. Anything else you want to say about storage, Kady or John? Hey there, everybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you about a new mattress or push a credit card on you. This isn't an ad. There are no ads on Volts. It is supported entirely by listeners like you. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'd like to ask for your support. I started Volts because we're all surrounded by depressing news about climate change and misinformation about clean energy, and it's never been more important to share the stories of the real people on the ground doing the real work of transition and all the ingenuity and courage and public spirit they are bringing to it. People are hungry to hear these stories, to learn from and find inspiration in them. I've heard from people who change majors or careers after hearing episodes of Volts, people using it in classrooms and community groups, even state legislators who have passed bills inspired by specific episodes. Sharing these stories matters. It makes a difference. If you have found value in it and want to help me continue doing it, I hope you will join the community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee a month. If you don't like subscriptions, you can make a one-time contribution, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or just tell a friend about Volts. I am grateful for any and all support. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. And now, back to the show. There's a procurement plan. There's a storage for all plan modeled on the solar for all plan to get storage into low-income hands. Anything else you want to say about storage, Kady or John?
Yeah, I'm almost tempted to just read through the menu and have you select.
There's so many.
And I think to a certain subset of the audience, this might just feel like a storage bill, first and foremost. This was our big leap into the world of ensuring that we have that asset on the grid. CEJA, again, primarily focused on renewables. This is our big leap into the storage world. And so some of the marquee items, we're aiming for 3 gigawatts of bulk storage by 2030. That's a goal sort of set into statute. And we felt comfortable doing that in part because our coalition, a number of different members, had run some analysis of their own to determine that, yes, we know we're going to lead at least 3 gigawatts by 2030. So even though the state hadn't yet started to do this modeling that we've envisioned in the IRP, we've realized that that is a key piece of that least cost energy transition.
Everybody's going to need batteries everywhere. This is
100%.
Nobody's guessing about this. That's as close to a sure thing as there is.
Yep. It's all just about how much we need and a little bit about, when and where it's most useful. The market can take care of some of that, but that's what the IRP will now do is maybe it actually is 5 or 6 gigawatts by 2030 is that least cost grid. And so it allows the state to start to toggle that. But then, I don't know how much time we have, David, but there's a VPP in here that I could...
Wait, I'm just getting to the VPP. That's next up.
Okay.
Next up.
Then I won't spoil too much on storage here beyond that.
Yeah, so big on storage. So then let's talk about VPPs, because this is also interesting to me beyond Illinois. So there's a dynamic happening in Illinois that seems to me sort of like a larger national dynamic happening in miniature in the state, which is all these data centers coming up, spiking electricity demand. Everyone is discovering that the processes and institutions that we have set up to run the energy system are pretty slow and are not fast and responsive enough to get new capacity on the grid fast enough to handle these data centers. So everyone's panicking. You see a lot of, reading around about this bill. I can't tell you how many quotes I saw of people saying like, well, it takes 4 to 5 years to build new power plants, so I guess we got to get started, And meanwhile, there are like city-sized data centers banging on the door, trying to get online today. They're losing millions of dollars a day every day they don't get online. So this is the background. And then you look around and you say, well, where is there capacity on the grid where we don't have to build a giant new power plant, right? We don't have to build a nuclear plant. We don't have to build a gas plant. We don't have to build solar and storage. There is extant grid capacity scattered all around us in every building, in every home and building. There's a little scrap of grid capacity. And so if you could just round up this distributed capacity, you can satisfy these data centers' needs way faster than any physical power plant. That's the background here. So given that background, I will say that the virtual power plant program authorized in this bill is like, I would say charitably, a small first step. And I'm just sort of wondering why, given this insane pressure to find grid capacity, to find room on the grid to put these things, why there isn't more attention, bigger ambitions around this, why people aren't coming around to realize like we have the capacity, we just got to round it up. So Kady, I'd love to hear from you because you're talking to lawmakers all day, every day. The virtual power plants are a little complicated. They're a new thing in the world. I don't know that a lot of lawmakers understand them deeply. So what is your kind of reading, your temperature take on people's openness to this and understanding of this virtual power plant notion?
I think folks were really intrigued about the ability for this to be actually some of the quickest savings and energy to come online, right? And at the end of the day, that's what this was. Like, to us, it's a clean energy bill, but to legislators, this is an affordability bill.
For sure.
And so to be able to, and we had the analysis of what was going to be able to come online quickest, where the savings was going to be, because the number one question I got from lawmakers talking to them about this bill was, look, my constituents' bills are going up. How does this help them?
Yep.
And so to be able to point to, especially this specific section, and talk about what the savings would be, it is pretty significant. And same with the batteries.
It was RMI, I think, did an analysis, and they found that VPPs could meet almost all the expected new demand in Illinois. So like RMI is telling the legislature, this is a huge, right? This could almost do it on its own. So I guess I don't know how to calibrate like whether this is enough. What's your take, John? Like substantively, how big of a step do you think this is?
Yeah, so I think we were facing this conundrum where you can either go fast or you can be thorough. And we decided to do both in classic Illinois fashion. So it is a two-phased approach that I think rises to the occasion. It starts by just keeping things simple. Right, it is something called a scheduled dispatch program, which is sort of in a slightly different part of the bill. And that is designed to unleash the solar and storage that's currently out there. As I mentioned, we already have 1.1 gigs of DG energized in Illinois, and there's a lot more coming. I think by 2035, we'll have over 2 gigs just of community solar that's in the pipeline ready to go. And so we're starting to figure out, what does it look like to begin utilizing those resources to full effect now.
Mm-hmm.
VPPs are meant to be bigger and broader than solar and storage, but that is one of the VPP superpowers, is to take all those power walls and all the rooftop solar and to start leveraging it to its full effect. And they can, as you mentioned, lower system peaks, defer expensive grid upgrades, improve resilience, especially in perhaps disadvantaged communities or places where the grid needs that type of locational value the most. And so we start with that scheduled dispatch, which gives us time to then build out a more robust, more comprehensive VPP platform. And so that's probably what you saw that is still a couple years away. We knew that if we threw all of these really big ideas around a virtual power plant at the commission, that we might get bogged down for some time, that, we might not have that immediate effect that Kady just mentioned was top of mind for legislators. And so we did try to split it between these two initiatives. And I'll say procedurally, this is also some credit to the symbiosis between our big coalition, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, and the renewable energy industry. They are pretty skittish around regulatory quagmires. They know how things can gum up the works, while we're, pretty hell-bent on these higher and longer term ideals around getting it right. And I think this represents a pretty nice compromise between the two that we hope we can replicate in other states as well.
All right. So basically, we're starting with what amounts to kind of an emergency demand response program, which is you put, distributed solar and batteries, they can ride to the rescue in moments of grid stress. And that's always the foot in the door.
Right.
For VPPs. So the idea is that you'll have a couple of years of that, and then you'll stand up a richer virtual power plant program.
Correct.
By which you just mean you're going to tell the utilities they have to do it.
Yep.
Basically.
Yep. It provides the guidelines and some of the necessary inputs, but ultimately the ball will go to them to develop what those tariffs and that new program looks like. But the interim step, that immediate thing, is really just shifting that solar superpower into the afternoon. It's a scheduled dispatch, right? We ran the analysis. We realized how much more valuable those solar electrons are. 4 to 6 p.m. for residential users, 4 to 7 p.m. for community solar plus storage. And so we just have those peak hours and the peak months of the summer coming to the rescue by fully leveraging that fleet. So that's the minimum viable product. And then we'll start to get fancy with EVs and bidirectional and thermostats.
One hopes the ICC sees this work and realizes that as much pain as there might be wading in here and trying to set up these complicated programs, it's less than the pain of telling ratepayers that they that they have to pay more.
Right.
Okay, we're like already over time, and there's like 400,000 more things. I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of other things. There's going to be an audit of the transmission and distribution system. And there's some pressure in here to adopt grid-enhancing technologies, making more use of the grid we already have. That, I think, is going to be a huge piece of the national conversation on energy affordability in other states, too. I think it's going to be a key plank in the Democratic energy agenda going forward. People think like there's this new demand coming and we have to build new power plants to satisfy the new demand, but we're only like grid utilization is at a historic low. We're only using the grid at like 50%. So this grid enhancing technologies allow us to do more with the grid we've got. That's awesome. There are pilot programs for thermal energy networks, which are a friend of the pod, a long time love affair here on the pod. We love thermal energy networks, which is, as listeners know, these shallow geothermal networks for heating and cooling. There's some pilot programs for that. Geothermal is eligible for renewable energy credits now. Very cool. It repeals the moratorium on large-scale nuclear construction. I'm curious from both of you whether you think that matters at all, whether you think anything's going to come out of that. Kady, do lawmakers, I'm so curious what their sort of disposition toward nuclear is, how they think about it. Do you think this is a big deal?
Illinois has a lot of nuclear generation,
Yes.
Right? And I will say even in my, 10, 15 years in the Illinois legislature, I've seen the tides on nuclear shift a bit more. I think that there's a lot of support for nuclear power in the legislature. And this being in there, I don't believe we're going to see large scale over 300 megawatt nuclear power plants being built here in Illinois. And if If so, one, they're going to have to come back for ratepayer funding anyway.
Ugh.
And two, they're not actually meeting the moment in terms of bringing needed generation online quickly or cheaply. That's not really what they're known for. However, there is a lot of support in the legislature. There is a lot of support also from our governor. And at the end of the day, there were a lot of stakeholders that we needed to bring on board to be supporters, including organized labor and including some legislators who felt really strongly about nuclear. And so this was sort of a political necessity for inclusion.
Interesting. There's also a ton more money for home retrofits, for low income home retrofit assistance, et cetera, et cetera. That's a whole thing. There's a thing on here that requires ComEd and Ameren to implement time of use rates, which is like a whole separate thing. Also very cool.
And I feel like that's the trifecta of things that we can deploy now, right? TOU, like virtual power plants, can help shift that load.
Yeah.
Energy efficiency reduces it overall. And there is one piece that I wanted to flag of the power of distributed generation in starting to bend that curve. My colleague, Will Kenworthy, had done a fair amount of research about what the existing distributed generation had already done. And it has already, according to ComEd and their filing to PJM, reduced their capacity obligation by 479 megawatts.
Amazing.
And so that, when you look at these record high capacity prices,
Yes.
that is about $47 million per year in avoided capacity costs for the ComEd customers.
And of course, we know, all of us know here at Volt, time of use rates is a great way to incentivize the use of distributed generation, which you can move around quickly in time or space. So
Absolutely.
very cool. Oh, one other thing, there's a study in here about whether it would be better for Illinois to bail out of PJM and MISO and create a Texas-style, California-style, single-state RTO. What's going on there? Is this just kind of a sop to people who want a study of that, or is this a serious, like, is there real momentum behind this?
Kady, you want to take that?
Sure. Look, there's no secret that there are some major challenges posed by the ISOs, right? And the fact that also that Illinois is split between MISO and PJM, is not exactly helping us as we're trying to desperately build the clean energy economy that this nation deserves. And so, is this real? Yeah, this seems worth studying. It seems worth knowing what are the pros and cons. Also, are governors trying to find different ways to exert the pressure that they may be able to have over PJM and MISO? And is this a demonstration of that? I think so.
Yeah, I think it's a nice little shot across the bow, as well as potentially a path forward, right? It leaves us a little less exposed if we can start to write some of those rules.
Interesting. Okay, so that's all I've got for the substance of the bill. As I said, there are 975 more provisions in here. Are there any other pieces of the bill substantively that you want to flag before we move on?
You already touched on the Storage for All initiative, but I know at the top of the conversation, I talked about just social license and political viability. Not only is this type of initiative the right thing to do, it also expands the tent.
Tell us quickly what it is.
Yeah, so it is designed to build off of our existing Illinois Solar for All program, which was initially created in VIJA and then fine-tuned in CEJA in 2021, but it never had storage. And so now we have this opportunity to follow all of these successful low-income solar projects with storage. And suddenly, the food pantry that was just saving a bunch of money through rooftop solar is now a resilience hub, is now able to potentially monetize the storage in the same way that other customers can with the VPP. And so we're excited to explore what that looks like to build community resilience in those income qualified communities through Illinois Storage for All.
Yeah. I've always thought that just like sticking solar on low-income houses, it has some benefits. But I've always kind of thought, if I'm a poor household, I'd probably rather have cash than someone deciding what kind of energy it is. But if you put solar panel and a battery all of a sudden it's more useful to the homeowner, and it's more useful to the community, and it's more useful to the utility. All of a sudden you see sort of like a much bigger picture taking shape.
That's right. And it always is, right? We know that these technologies are often skewing towards those with wealth or means.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a general belief at Vote Solar, I think within our coalition, that there is a better way forward in allowing people that choice to figure out if they want to participate directly, because the benefits to that participant are higher. There's benefits to everybody, right? The community benefits through resilience, the grid benefits through decreased costs.
Batteries are magic for everywhere. Everywhere you put them, they're magic.
So storage for all was one. And then the other small, but I think significant thing is we improve our intervener compensation framework in Illinois. And this does bring me to a quick shout out of the pod. We worked closely with a lot of different advocacy groups as part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. That's honestly, if there's a secret sauce in Illinois, it's that we don't divide and conquer ourselves.
A novel approach on the left. You should write an essay about that or something to spread that.
And one of the groups that was very much there and helping to craft a lot of these policies was the Citizens Utility Board, who is laser focused on affordability. This is their mandate.
Yeah, that's a ratepayer.
That's right. And so they were interested in a lot of different policies in the bill. They wanted to ensure that things like the IRP were laser focused on affordability. And our policies adapted along the way to ensure that this was a big enough tent to bring in all of the different advocates out in the community. So build a big table. It takes a ton of work, but it yields tremendous dividends.
And I would love it if one thing that could come out of this is ratepayer advocates across the country get religion on VPPs. I would love to see that in every state. All right, so that's enough about the bill itself. So I should say, when I was initially conceiving this episode, I thought maybe we could cover the big Illinois energy bill and the big transit bill they also passed at the same time. Clearly, that was folly, but I feel like I should at least mention at some point, in addition to this giant sweeping comprehensive energy bill, Illinois also passed a $1.5 billion transit package that is going to fund regional transport. It's going to restructure the way regional public transportation is run. Just a huge and incredibly significant thing that I'm probably not going to be able to mention anywhere else on the pod, so I just want to call it out here. Illinois, very busy in Illinois. Kady, I wanted to ask you a political question, which John sort of set us up for here, which is just talk a little bit about the coalition. I know the Clean Jobs Coalition goes way back to CEJA. Always labor is, to me at least, something I feel like I never quite have my head wrapped around. Like I never can quite get my arms around what the role is and what their valence is towards all this. I know there were some special talks with labor getting them on board with this thing. Can you just say a little bit about the coalition that passed this bill and labor's role in it?
I'd love to. Yeah. So the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition actually goes even back to FEJA. So we have been together a long time.
And these are, just say a little bit about who's in that.
So over 200 organizations from across the state, but the leaders are really, yes, the green groups like Vote Solar and NRDC and Sierra Club, but also, ratepayer advocacy organizations. CUB is very prominent. And I would say a lesson is for folks who also want to really recognize how central affordability is in climate policy right now. And I have a lot to say about that, that we can't just have these folks on our team. Like we got to listen to them. We got to work with them when we develop policies. We can't just be dragging them along. They are true partners. And that's really what CUB has been.
We need to convince them of the truth of the fact that clean energy is cheap, right? Like that's
totally.
Cheap is their thing.
And co-create. And honestly, cheap needs to be our thing now too, if we want to win. So it is a really symbiotic relationship. But we also have community groups and faith-based groups and all that, a number of different organizations that care about climate.
Are there industry groups?
We do not have industry. Industry has their own coalition. We work very close with them. But, we are a different voice. And I think we have a special power in the legislature also just because we have been around for so long.
Yeah, they must know you guys. They must know you guys by now. They must.
And we're, we try not to mess that up, right? I talked about being our, teacher's pet. We have to operate in a certain way because we aren't organized labor and we're not the companies, right? We're here. Like our interest is the public interest. And there's some power in that too, because, we're not just out here, trying to make a buck or whatever the thing is. We're trying to make good policy. So, the Clean Jobs Coalition is robust. And the one thing I'll say just as a lesson for other states, and we get asked about this a lot, is, we have all the administrative stuff, right? We have norms and processes and votes and things like that. And what it does do is it gives us a place to have disagreement inside the house rather than like in the pages of the newspaper on the op-ed pages, which like
sources close to the campaign say.
Like, please stop doing that, people. Instead, please, just have ways to be able to disagree and then, come to consensus on your own. And that has the strength of the coalition was really felt. And especially me as the lobbyist and kind of like the main person in the Capitol, we had so many different teams. I mean, this was a giant bill. So if we were talking energy efficiency, like I had the 3 to 5 people that were leading on EE policy, and then I had the VPP people, and and it meant we had all these people behind us, even if, 1 or 2 of us were the hub in the actual Capitol. And that was just also meant we're a stronger movement because of it. It's not just like 2 negotiators in the room. It's like all these experts crafting a 1,000-page bill.
You guys have gotten some sort of magic sauce in Illinois where like I read about these things and I never read about like internal left, disagreements. Like you read about it everywhere, like in national politics, of course, like 90% of stories in the political section of the national newspapers is just lefties tearing each other apart. And there's so little of that that's coming out of Illinois. I assume like those fights are happening, but as you say, they're not happening on the front page.
We sort it out because, we know we're going to go out and to where you're headed next. Like organized labor is a fixture in Illinois politics.
Yes,
and I think
huge.
After FEJA and after CEJA, we kind of did have a question. We were like, could we pass an energy bill like with them just neutral?
Were they on board for both those previous?
Yes.
They were on board for FEJA and CEJA?
They were. And with this bill, we learned that is still the case. We have to have organized labor on board. And I mentioned earlier, the first question I would get lobbying lawmakers was, people's bills are going up. What is this going to do? How does this bring bills down? And the number 2 question, and there were only 2 questions I really got. The number 2 question was, where's organized labor? And that kind of sums up the whole bill for you right there. And so, we had months and months and the reason why we didn't get this done in January and we didn't get it done in May and we had to come back a 3rd time this fall was because labor was not yet supportive.
And can you just tell us a little bit about those dynamics? Like when you pass a bill that the implication of which is, let's build a bunch more stuff. I always think like, why in the world would the people in charge of building the stuff not support that? So like, what are the dynamics? What holds them back from this kind of stuff?
Sure. So first, let's start with the clean energy economy in Illinois has added jobs 5 times faster than Illinois' overall economy. And there are more than 3 times as many Illinoisans that work in clean energy than the number of lawyers, real estate agents, and web developers combined. I will tell you, it does not necessarily feel like that in the halls of the Capitol. We've built relationships with the trades. I know these guys. I like these guys. We work with them. But the story that I kept being told was, look, you passed CEJA, we're building clean energy, but there was a worker in central Illinois who works for one of the trades that drove by a job site, a community solar job site in central Illinois, and saw a bunch of pickup trucks with out-of-state license plates. And they were like, look, you passed CEJA, and now you're telling me I'm getting all these jobs in my community, but why are all these people from Indiana and Missouri the ones building it?
Is the point of hiring out-of-state labor to avoid having to hire unions? Is that the sort of implication there?
Yes. So what we had done in CEJA was a large percentage of the clean energy that we're building in the state is subject to project labor agreements. So it's necessarily union. We had carved out, especially in community solar, below 5 megawatts. If you remember, equity was really at the core of CEJA, and we wanted to make sure there was a market for smaller, what we called equity eligible contractors to be able to build up and do this work and build their businesses. And that has borne out in the data. We pulled all the projects since CEJA was passed, and a vast majority of the equity eligible contractor projects were those community solar under 5 megawatts. Well, now here enters labor saying the main thing they want out of this energy bill is just a bigger slice of the pie, right? They want that 5 megawatt threshold to be lowered down to 1. They want to do all that work because they are seeing these out-of-state license plates and they're upset about it. Which, to be honest, I'm also not happy with out-of-state license plates doing this work in Illinois.
But also, the reason these sub 5 megawatt projects are not hiring union labor is that it is going to be more expensive.
That's what I'm told. And so here we are, this being a consistent story that we're hearing from labor for months and months and months. It's not like they sprung this ask on us, the week before the bill. And, they tried to work this out with industry and it didn't quite work. And we finally realized we have to take this seriously. And as advocates, we kind of need to step in and run this negotiation and truly listen to what they're saying, right? So I think there's some larger lessons in dealing with labor here that are relevant for other states. Right. Like negotiation 101, understand underlying interests.
Keen insight, all too often ignored.
Well, and like I said, right, labor is not going away anywhere, but especially as a fixture of Illinois Democratic politics. And so they're within the power structures, and we can't just come into a negotiating room with them and tell them that their numbers don't match the stories that their workers are feeling, right? We can't just explain our way into winning a negotiation with these guys.
So did the threshold get bumped down to 1?
It
megawatt?
Got lowered to 3, and in exchange, we were able to, I don't know if you know any numbers in between 1 and 5, but that's where we landed. And we were able to secure funding for equity eligible contractors every year to have assistance programs to be able to comply with PLAs. So, that's a summary of the deal, essentially.
And that was the main thing that brought unions on board?
That was the main thing that the AFL wanted. So there were, as the building trades represent a number of different trades. And so there were concerns from some about the size of the battery storage target. There were some that wanted to add the geothermal program, which, you talked about earlier. But I think, again, and this has lessons for us too in our future endeavors in Illinois, right? Labor is going to have to be not just neutral, but supporters when we do data centers, when we do building decarb, right?
Yes.
Those are going to be harder, frankly. So there's, relationship building, but you also need to, be able to actually show power and show muscle. Because what do these guys respond to? It's not just you showed up at their solidarity rally, so now they're going to be pro clean energy. It's they respond to strength. And so you got to also be strong in the room, and you got to be able to go toe to toe with these folks and have a long-term strategy with organized labor. And that's what I worry about, what I see sometimes from the industry is who has a long-term strategy around their relationship with the building trades? The fossil fuel companies do. Oh, the utilities do. And so I think the clean energy industry needs to be in the same boat because this is not going away. We could be working together to build this economy rather than, sometimes at odds.
Yeah. Are they opposed to the fossil fuel closures? I'm sort of guessing that they're not thrilled about that.
But that's kind of been litigated, right? That was in CEJA.
Yeah.
And so their main ask, and it's worth noting, right? Their main ask in this bill wasn't to roll back the decarb targets. It was to build more of the clean energy.
Yes.
So that's a win. That's
hallelujah.
Labor represents the jobs of today, not necessarily the jobs of tomorrow. But as those jobs of tomorrow happen today more and more, we're starting to see those conversations become a little bit easier. Not a lot easier. And so my second big takeaway for other states is go find a Kady McFadden to engage in Springfield and to build these longitudinal relationships. But we are starting to see them realize that this is becoming a bigger and bigger slice of their member pool. And that helps to facilitate those conversations a little bit.
Okay, so I have 2 final questions. One is a political question. For you, Kady, I'd love to hear your thoughts too, John. There are lots of, as we just sort of discussed at the beginning, there are lots of things pushing electricity prices up in Illinois. There's lots of things pushing them up. all over the place, but there are lots of big structural forces that are going to be very difficult to reverse in the short term, at least. Like you can marginally reduce them maybe, but like it's very unlikely that like in the next election cycle, for instance, there's going to be some dramatic fall in electricity prices. So I guess my political question for you, Kady, is if you pass this big thing and then electricity prices continue to rise for the following 2 to 3 years, do you worry about blowback? Or are you worried about that happening? Or do you think you're going to be able to bring prices down? So what's the, like, I guess I just wonder, like, so many things are pushing prices up. Even if you do things to make that less bad than it otherwise could be, it's not going to look good politically if you're waging war on high prices and prices are still rising.
So we were really honest about this when we were lobbying. We were thorough and honest. I always say in Springfield, all you have is your word. And so, yeah, we know what the future may hold. And so the way that we described this was currently Illinois ratepayers are unprotected from dramatic price spikes in regional energy markets, as we've seen this summer. Surja will help Illinois families mitigate the rising cost of electricity bills by better protecting from those volatile price spikes. And then there's the thing. We had to be able to talk about that this was going to keep bills from rising, and we needed numbers.
Yeah.
And so we had an analysis from the Illinois Power Agency, and this helped the framing to some of your questions earlier. Like, if we could say, here's a giant clean energy bill, and guess what? In ComEd, your constituents are going to save $2 a month, and in Ameren, they're going to save $10 a month in 2030 because of all these programs.
That's kind of the net. That's what they analyze as the net result of the bill.
You got it. And so to have those numbers was powerful. Overall, with all the investment, the bill will deliver $13 in reduced cost for every $1 invested. I don't know where you can get that kind of investment these days. And so to be able to be really honest about, look, here's the best possible affordability solutions right now, not even climate, not clean energy solutions. Here are the best affordability solutions we can offer you right now when it's the main issue you're hearing about in your district. Here's how much it's going to save you. And it allowed us to be coming with solutions at a time, frankly, in our world in which, like, there are plenty of problems that these legislators are facing right now. And so to be able to
Yes.
say, like, hey, look, here's some solutions, and you can go back and be honest. And yes, we got pushback from, the moderate caucus in particular, like, look, don't tell me this is going to be lowering people's bills if it's not going to lower people's bills. But they got it, right? They understood that, like, what we're doing is we're unprotected now, and we need to layer in that protection. And that's what this bill is going to do.
One of the things I like about this bill is, as you keep saying, like, it takes seriously the idea that clean energy is the cheapest and is going to reduce prices, right? Not just as a slogan, like it makes several big bets.
But that's how we won.
Premised on that.
That is how we won, right? And I think that's the sort of tip of the spear kind of lesson from Illinois right now is, like, I'm not convinced we ever needed to or should be talking about climate right now. If our policies go hand in hand with affordability, like, why would we not frame everything in the most salient political issue of the moment?
Right. Well, we're in the catbird seat right now in that our solutions do happen to be the fastest and cheapest.
Yes.
So
let's run.
Seems like
let's go.
Let's just say the words fastest and cheapest over and over again.
I'm not saying don't talk about climate. There's plenty of things to talk about climate on. And there's some interesting proposals around climate and resilience and adaptation. Sure, let's talk about climate and who's responsible, and make polluters pay. And I love all that. But when these solutions that we're, like I said, putting on a silver platter for legislators to win and rallying stakeholders around, like, let's focus on what people really care about.
And then the next time you come to them, you knock on their door to be like, hey, we're the people who brought your constituents' bills down. You're going to get they're going to open the door for you when you are back to talk more directly about climate. John, what's next? That's my final question. You've got 3 sweeping comprehensive energy bills in the past decade. I'm not sure there is another state in the union, maybe California, who has a sort of just on a quantitative basis, a sheer tonnage basis, more energy legislation passed than you guys. Is there a big next thing, or are you going to see how this plays out for a while?
Yeah, right. Was this the energy bill to end all energy bills? I don't think so. I think we still have a lot of work to do. There's one that I'll probably just tee up for maybe Kady to dig even deeper on, which is data centers.
Yes.
David, I think a year ago we talked about the acronym Beyonce, Bring Your Own New Clean Energy. And this was on the table at different moments along the path to Surja.
Too much, too big an ask?
It became clear that this was bogging down the momentum of the full bill. And again, maybe Kady can fill in some of the blanks, but
there are some bits about data centers. There's about air pollution.
That's right.
Around data. At least trying to sort of at least dial back the gross portable gas generators that they're building around these things. It's kind of a first step. So what's the two questions, Kady? So what's the substantive, like, what do you want to do about data centers? Like, what are you pitching? And then two, I'm just curious, like the political, this is one of my big questions nationally too. Like, what is the political valence of data centers? What do people, normies on the street, think about them? So I'm just curious your thoughts on the future of this in Illinois.
So there were a number of legislators that were upset that we didn't directly address data centers in this bill. And we really had to pitch it as this is part one of two. Like, we do this first and data centers is two. So I need a nap, but like then we can do, people are writing the data center bill as we speak, I'm told. So while I nap. But no, we are getting ready to introduce something in January. I mean, this is part of the same problem, and we talked about it in that way, and we need to now, again, put on a platter some solutions. And so what do those look like? John mentioned, bringing your own clean energy. I think it's not necessarily an energy topic, but water use is so important that I can't imagine the political salience of something like this being able to move forward without addressing water. We need to talk about who's paying for the transmission costs and who's, are we rate basing all of the lines that are going to these data centers too and making ratepayers pay for them? So I think there's a lot to dig in there. And the politics, I know this is really unique to Illinois, but the politics have also shifted on this in that the data centers now have a legislative ask that's separate from energy or water or anything like that, but something that around biometric privacy data that they need addressed at the legislature. And so just from our perspective, it just means that there's necessarily a leverage point in a negotiation table coming around. And so we didn't have that last year. We did get alignment with the governor's office around some of these policies. And I will say it's honestly a bit shocking that we haven't brought up Governor Pritzker yet, because it's hard to talk about Illinois leadership without, the role that he plays and the importance of having him really in the driver's seat, ready to make good policy here.
His office was behind you guys on all this.
We were in lockstep and working to just stay in lockstep there, because that just helped us be able to move policies forward. And he's been such a leader on these issues. And I think, that's going to continue on data centers. And then, eventually looking down the road, I mean, we also have to talk about building decarbonization, industrial decarbonization. We use a lot of gas in our homes and businesses here in Illinois, disproportionately so. But the same political dynamics, right? We're going to have to get labor on board. All those caucuses I mentioned are going to have to be down with that. And that's a hard one, but it's necessary.
Well, let me just put this, just to do a little freelance editorializing, an hour and a half into this hour-long discussion. Just to put this in your ear, there's lots of talk, which I find very interesting. These data centers want to hook up to the grid desperately. They need spare capacity on the grid desperately. They have a ton of money. Illinois has, as discussed earlier, all this distributed grid capacity. Like something as simple as like if a homeowner has electric resistance heating, you replace that with a heat pump, you've freed up a little chunk of grid capacity. So how do the data centers have all the money, the distributed stuff has a money problem, a missing money problem. It's hard to organize large scale investments in it. So something that gives data centers a way to pay for that distributed capacity as a way of getting connected to the grid. This is something I discussed with Ari from Rewiring America a few weeks ago. I've had several conversations on different aspects of it, but just like the data centers have all the money, the distributed energy needs the money. Let's hook the one up with the other.
You've read my mind, David. Or maybe you informed my mind. I'm not sure where the chicken and the egg is, but this is something that Vote Solar is looking closely at. I mean, I just ran some of the numbers. We're working on virtual power plants in 30 different places next year.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a big year to start to figure out how we unlock and unleash that army of distributed energy resources.
Yes.
And I think the data centers are coming to this sobering realization that utility scale resources are not going to come in and save the day, that the interconnection queues all over the country are pretty jammed up.
And that if you can structure a way to pay for the distributed energy,
exactly,
it is the cheapest. It is the cheapest and fastest, to return to a theme.
Absolutely.
A lot of states and hyperscalers are going to be coming around to this soon because it's just the math of it. It's the cheapest, fastest power available. And they are losing whatever millions of dollars a day every day they don't hook up to the grid.
And I think Illinois is open for that type of business, is my suggestion.
Interesting.
As somebody with Illinois roots and now a national perspective, this seems to be a hotbed of that type of activity.
Yeah.
And with, like Kady said, JB at the helm here. I mean, you have to remember our job in many cases is to be mad at the governor. We're advocates, right?
Hard to be too mad at Pritzker.
It is. It sure is. He makes it hard on us. But we do have a great setup that is very forward thinking. And so you asked about next steps. And one of my main next steps is how do we replicate and modulate different parts of these lessons into other states and vice versa.
Yes.
Just knowing that climate leadership at the state level seems to be teetering on its heels when we really should be sprinting forward.
All right. Well, that seems like a great note to end on. Thank you both so much for coming on and talking through this. Fascinating, legislatively fascinating, substantively fascinating, politically fascinating in every which way. So I apologize for keeping you so long, but this has been excellent. Thank you both.
Thank you.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Volts. It takes a village to make this podcast work. Shout out especially to my super producer, Kyle McDonald, who makes me and my guests sound smart every week. And it is all supported entirely by listeners like you. So if you value conversations like this, please consider joining our community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf, or leaving a nice review, or telling a friend about Volts, or all three. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.